Your son isn't worth saving. That's what my mother said to me, out loud, between a champagne toast and a violin solo, surrounded by 100 people pretending not to hear. Crystal chimed. Laughter shivered. A server slipped behind me with a silver tray while I locked eyes with the woman who taught me how to smile without showing teeth. We were at the Grand Meridian Ballroom, the ceiling painted with angels, the walls draped in white silk, every table heavy with orchids and gold-rimmed glass. Sponsors' names glowed in ice sculptures. A banner behind the stage read, Hope Gala, Saving Lives Together. Don't be dramatic, she added, tilting her flute. Go home. My jaw went numb. I tasted metal. People kept talking about auctions and matching gifts, but their eyes slid toward us and away again like fish in a tank. I could see myself reflected in the mirrored pillars, mascara perfect, dress borrowed, breath broken. Mom, I said, and the word cracked. Please. She didn't flinch. Don't call me that here. Something inside me ripped, quiet as silk. The violinist lifted into a tender reprise. Applause rose around us, soft and obedient. I tried to swallow, but my throat refused to move. My hands were damp and cold, clutching a folded estimate the size of a death sentence. 85,000, I whispered. They need it, tonight. She glanced at the paper like it was a napkin I'd picked up off the floor. Then you should have thought of that before you threw your life away. Her smile widened for the table to our left. Enjoy the evening. It felt like falling without motion. I stared at the centerpiece, white roses dusted in fake frost, while the MC tapped the microphone for the live auction. We're funding miracles tonight, he said brightly. Let's open our hearts. My mother lifted her paddle. 20,000, she sang. The table cheered. I couldn't breathe in that room. The air smelled like lilies and old perfume and rich promises. I took 2 steps back and bumped into a chair. Someone's hand touched my elbow kindly and then recoiled, like pity wasn't on the menu. I found the exit by mistake, palms slipping against the... I pressed my back against the wall, the silk of my dress scraping against a nail head. Voices floated from the ballroom. To generosity, to second chances, to children who deserve a future. I walked. Past portraits of donors, past a table of silent auction items, vacations, wine, a weekend with a celebrity chef. A volunteer smiled warmly at me and asked if I needed a tax form. I shook my head and kept walking, until the marble steps spat me into rain. It was the kind of rain that cleans high buildings and drowns small people. I ran barefoot the last block to my car because my shoes were liars, made for rooms where nothing heavy is carried. Cold water slid under the collar of my dress and down my spine. The driver's seat felt like a safe I didn't know the code to. My fingers shook as I jabbed the ignition, the windshield wipers flailing their useless kindness. Don't be dramatic. Her voice sat beside me like a passenger. I drove to the hospital like I was rowing against a black tide. The parking garage was a gray throat. Doors hissed open and spit me into fluorescent breath. When I reached the pediatric ICU, the world shrank to white light, quiet machines, and the rhythm of 100 soft wars. The nurse at the desk recognized me. She had freckles and a voice like warm tea. He's stable, she said. For now. For now. The words knocked the wind from me. I pressed my palm flat on the counter to feel something solid. The payment, she bit her lip. I'm sorry. They can't move forward without, I know, I said, and my voice surprised me with how flat it was. I lifted the folded paper. It shook like a small animal. I'm trying. Her eyes softened, then braced. Would you like to sit with him? Yes. The word left me like a breath I'd been hoarding. We walked down the hallway. My heels clicked, slipped, stopped. I took them off and carried them, the cold tile scolding my feet with every step. Through the glass I saw him, my boy, small, still, threaded into a forest of beeping lights. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm that wasn't his, and I hated the machine for being generous, and I loved it for the same reason. "Hey, baby," I said, "because the body remembers it." "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "The surgeon is ready. They can't hold the room much longer." 5 minutes, I said. My mouth was dry. "Please." She nodded and left. I stood so fast the chair barked against the floor. I walked into the corridor like I was walking into weather. At the end of the hall, a clock shouted its numbers. I called my mother. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Her voice answered, smooth and distant. "Hello?" "It's me," I said. My hand squeezed around the phone so hard my knuckles pinched. "Please." Silence. A clink of glass on glass. Music, muffled. She was still at the gala. "He needs the surgery now," I said. "They won't start without the money." A breath on the other end. That familiar sigh, disappointed, expensive. "You made your choices," she said, each word a chilled stone. "Live with them." The call ended. A tone lingered in my ear like a tiny siren, then died. I stared at my reflection in the window, damp hair, ruined makeup, a dress that didn't belong to this corridor. My thumb hovered over her name, then slid to messages because even hope understands humiliation. "Please," I typed. "He is 6. He loves dinosaurs. He's afraid of thunder. Please." I watched the bubble tremble. Delivered. No dots. The bright hallway tilted. I sat on the floor even though it smelled like bleach and something tired. I pressed my forehead to my knees and swallowed a sound that wanted to break the ceiling. The phone vibrated in my palm. A new message from her. The screen glowed too bright, like it knew it was about to hurt me. "Your son isn't worth saving." I didn't realize I'd dropped the phone until the clatter echoed off the walls. I didn't realize I'd bitten my lip until I tasted iron. My hands went cold, then hot, then nothing. I reached for the phone like it might run away and read the sentence again, because sometimes the body begs the mind to be wrong. "Your son isn't worth saving." The letters didn't change. They didn't soften. They sat there, neat and rich and final. I laughed. A short, broken sound. It startled me. I remembered the orchids at the gala. I remembered the ice shining with other people's names. I remembered the banner, "Saving Lives Together." My mother's laugh. The tilt of her wrist as she bid on hope. My phone buzzed once more. The screen asked if I wanted to react to her message with a heart or a thumbs up. I almost threw it. Instead, I clicked the screen off and tucked the device under my elbow like it might bite. "Hold on, baby," I whispered to the glass. "Hold on." I turned back toward the nurse and nodded, and my neck felt like it belonged to a stranger. My mouth formed words it didn't believe. "Tell them I'm still trying." She touched my arm, light as prayer, and went to make another call I couldn't pay for. A janitor pushed a cart past me, wheels soft, a mop handle knocking gently with every bump. Somewhere, a machine beeped a metronome for someone else's luck. I stared at the blank white of the wall until it became a sky I couldn't climb. My mother's message sat inside me now, carved into bone. It had the weight of a verdict and the shape of a door she'd shut, a door I couldn't open. I pressed my hand flat against my chest, like I could hold my ribs together. My voice surprised me again, small even. "Okay," I said to no one, and to her, and to the rain that had followed me here. "Okay." Then I looked at my child through the glass one last time and felt everything in me go quiet. And just like that, she decided who deserved to live. I used to believe I was exactly what my mother wanted. I learned early how to make my face behave. Smile with my teeth, not my eyes. Sit straight, cross ankles, speak only when invited. My chest always felt tight, like a ribbon pulled too hard. But I kept smiling because that's how love survived in our house. Piano was our treaty. My fingers ached, but I loved the sound of something gentle filling a room where sharp words usually lived. Mother hovered by the doorway, arms folded, counting my mistakes by the way her jaw moved. Perfect posture, she'd say. Not beautiful, not I'm proud. Perfect. Posture. Holidays were glossy and hollow, gold ornaments, red velvet bows, a tree that smelled like a store. We took pictures. Graduation felt like a finish line and a starting gun. She took my face in both hands and smiled so wide it almost looked real. "You'll make this family proud," she said. I nodded because the word no did not exist between us. My heart was loud that night. I wanted to ask, "Will you love me if I fail?" I didn't. I swallowed it. Again. Then I met him. Not a grand entrance, not sparks, not a stage. Just a quiet laugh in a hardware store when I dropped a box of screws and they scattered like silver rain. He knelt to help me. Our heads bumped. We laughed again. "Careful," he said, grinning. I felt something unclench inside me. He was simple in the best way, an engineer who could fix anything except his own nervous jokes. He listened like every word I said had weight. He didn't ask me to be impressive. He asked me to be hungry, and then he cooked. He asked me to be tired, and then he told me to rest. With him, my smile stopped hurting. We ate cheap noodles at a wobbly table, and it felt like a feast. He told me about bridges, about designing strength that yields just enough to survive wind and weight. I told him about my mother. He didn't wince. He just reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, like he was measuring the pressure it would take to keep me safe. He made me a ring from wire, clumsy, a little crooked, warm from his fingers. My breath shook when he held it out. "No diamonds," he said, "but it's honest." I said yes before I realized I was crying. I wasn't crying because I got a ring. I was crying because I didn't have to audition. I should have kept it to myself. I should have guarded it like a fragile, bright thing. But daughters who have been trained to perform bring their joy to the stage. That night was my mother's dinner party. Chandeliers, silver clinking, that expensive wine that smells like a promise. I told myself, she'll see me, she'll hear me, she'll be happy for me. Hope can be cruel when it's dressed like courage. I waited for the right moment, the way I'd been trained. Dessert plates lifted, laughter lifting with them. I stood behind my chair so I'd look taller, more certain. "Mom," I said, hands shaking under the tablecloth, "I'm engaged." She glanced at my hand. "Where's the ring?" I lifted my fingers, the wire catching the light like a shy thing. Another small laugh broke around the table, like glass under a shoe. My chest pinched. It's special," I said. "He made it." "From what?" she asked. "Wire." She put her wine glass down. The sound was small, but it shook the table in me. "This is not a joke," I said, voice thin. "It looks like one," she replied. I flinched like I'd been slapped. Something rose in me that I didn't recognize. Months of tenderness, of quiet dinners, of feeling safe for the first time. I wanted to protect it. I wanted to say, "You don't get to ruin this." But I had never been taught how to fight, only how to endure. My hands trembled in my lap. "Please," I whispered, "be kind." She leaned back, cool as ice sliding into a glass. "Be realistic." Her gaze traveled over me, not seeing me, seeing the version of me she'd built. "The family will never accept that." She didn't say him, she said that, like a stain. I felt heat surge into my face. I heard someone murmur, "Bless her heart," like a prayer with teeth. My vision blurred at the edges. "I'm happy," I said, and it came out like a defense. She tilted her head. "Happiness isn't the goal," she said. "Standards are." I should have sat down. I should have swallowed it, like always. Instead, I stood straighter, as if posture could save me. "My life is mine," I said. The words scared me. They sounded like breaking glass. For a second, I believed them. She smiled without heat. "If you walk out with him," she said, calm, public, deadly, "don't ever come back." The table inhaled and held it. Someone coughed. A fork scraped. My heart stumbled and then ran. This is the part where the old me would apologize. I would promise to reconsider, to delay, to correct. I would trade love for approval, again. But I felt the wire ring against my skin like a living thing. I thought about bridges, how they flex so they don't break. I realized I'd been a statue, not a bridge. My hands were sweating, my knees shook. I pushed my chair in so quietly it sounded like a lie. I heard the outburst came from a place I didn't know I had. "Why isn't love enough?" I asked. It wasn't a strategy. It was a wound. Her face barely moved. "Because love ends," she said. "Standards don't." Something inside me cracked in two. The quiet afterward was heavy. I could feel my pulse in my tongue. I looked at the women at the table and saw my possible futures, polite, polished, brittle. I looked at the door and saw air. My chair was a trap. I stepped away from it. She lifted her glass again, eyes on me like a judge delivering a sentence. "Last chance," she said. I swallowed hard. The wire ring caught on my other finger and stung me just enough to keep me awake. I reached for my coat. My fingers slipped on the fabric. "Good night," I said. It hurt. It also healed. I walked out. My legs were rubber, but they moved. I didn't look back, though the back of my neck ached with the weight of her stare. Outside, the air was colder than I expected, and I let it scald me clean. I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since childhood. I felt empty and full, wrong and right. On the sidewalk, I pressed my palm to my chest and felt my heart. It was racing like it had been locked in a room and finally found a door. I touched the wire ring. It dug in, a small pain I could choose. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but they were my hands. I whispered to the dark, "I choose me." The words didn't echo. They settled. I want to tell you it felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt like jumping off a moving train in the night. I lost the warmth of a house I never truly lived in. I lost the easy script I could recite in my sleep. But I found a voice that trembled and still spoke. I found the courage to let my life be ugly and true. I thought I'd lost everything as I walked away. The door clicked shut behind me and my chest throbbed with the finality of it. I thought, this is it. This is the cost of love. Maybe it was. My breath fogged in the cold and disappeared. So did the version of me who needed her permission to breathe. Cliffhanger? Here it is. I believed losing my mother would break me forever. We learned the shape of our days by listening. The pipes banged like an angry drum each time I turned the sink, and he'd laugh, roll up his sleeves and say, "Let me try." I'd hum while folding laundry on the wobbly table, a tune from piano lessons that used to taste like pressure. Here it tasted like steam, soft and harmless. When the power went out, he lit 2 candles and slid one across the table like a secret. "Dinner by candlelight," he said, wiggling his eyebrows. I laughed too loud, then covered my mouth, embarrassed by my own joy. He teased me for that, gently, the way you tease a bruise that's finally healing. At night, we lay awake and made plans we couldn't afford. He talked about bridges, how they're built to bend, not break. Strength isn't stiffness, he'd say, it's give. I carried that line like a spare key in my pocket. He drew on napkins, I wrote grocery lists on the back, and somehow neither of us minded. I stopped looking for mirrors. My hand stopped shaking when I reached for his. Some evenings I caught myself waiting for approval to enjoy my own life. Then he'd nudge my knee under the table and the thought would fall away like a loose thread. The day our son arrived, the world changed temperatures. Hospital rooms have their own weather, cold air, hot fear. I couldn't find my breath during the last contraction, and he pressed his forehead to mine. "You've got this," he whispered, voice breaking. I wanted to snap, to tell him he was wrong, that nothing in me had ever been got. But the cry came, tiny and fierce, and the room tilted. My arms were shaking so hard the nurse had to help me hold him. He was red and furious and perfect. I tried a smile that wasn't practiced, and it landed. He had my stubborn chin, his father's calm eyes. When they asked for a name, my throat closed around my father's. I forced the syllables through anyway. It felt like handing back a piece of time I'd stolen. Nights after that were holy in a tired way, the kind where you doze in a chair with a warm bundle on your chest and wake up with a wet shoulder and a full heart. I whispered nonsense into soft hair. He walked circles around the kitchen, humming off-key. We learned the geography of tiny sounds and the emergency of tiny needs.
Life made new routines anyway. On Sundays, the bakery saved us a paper bag of pastries. Sugar rich, he joked, carrying it upstairs like treasure. Sometimes we ate them in bed while the baby kicked at the sheets. I found crumbs in my hair and didn't care. I sang old carols while washing bottles because my voice settled the baby, and I didn't care that it didn't settle me. We counted diapers like coins. We counted smiles like miracles. It was small, this life, but it was ours. I trusted it so carefully, like stepping onto thin ice that kept holding. Time started showing off. First laugh, first tooth, first steps like drunken dances. "Mama," he said, as if I'd been waiting my whole life for permission to claim the name. My heart swelled so fast, it scared me. We saved the smallest things, a sock he'd outgrown, a napkin with a coffee ring in the shape of a heart. On his first birthday, we lit a bent candle on a cupcake and sang too loudly. I recorded it on my phone and didn't send it to anyone. Of course, I watched my family online. I told myself I didn't, but I did. I scrolled through their dinners and shining faces, the captions about tradition and excellence and blessings. I studied the angles of my mother's smile to see if anything had softened, if she thought of me when the music stopped and the room went quiet. Each photo felt like a museum of a life I wasn't allowed to walk into. I clicked anyway. I punished myself with their happiness. Then I kissed my son's feet and remembered which world was real. He grew fast. They do. One afternoon he tugged my sleeve, eyes serious the way children get when they've already decided on the truth. "Why haven't I met Grandma?" he asked. My mouth went dry. The old training rose up. Smile, smooth, conceal. "She lives far away," I said, and my voice didn't shake. His brow eased. He accepted the map I drew for him. I closed the bathroom door and pressed my forehead to the mirror till the glass fogged with my breath. The lie tasted like safety and salt. Even with that ache, beauty kept happening. The bakery's radio crackled each morning with love songs from years I was too young to remember. The owner saved me. I wish I could freeze the next morning and live inside it forever. He kissed my temple, the same spot every time, like he was turning on a light. "Back by 6, he said. "I'll bring coffee." I tucked his scarf into his collar, that silly habit of mine, as if fabric could protect the people I love. "Don't forget," I said, grinning like a fool. He tapped the ring he'd made me, now shiny from years of nervous fidgeting. "Never," he said. The door clicked. The sound felt ordinary. I didn't know it was a countdown. The day unraveled slowly, the way sweaters do. One snag, then a long, silent pull. The baby napped. I washed dishes. Rain moseyed in and patted the windows like a familiar. At noon, I checked my phone. No message, no coffee emoji, nothing that meant still here. I told myself he was busy, the way people lie to stay standing. By 3, my stomach had that cold, floating feeling, like an elevator stuck between floors. I called. It rang into nowhere. When the knock came, it was polite. 2 taps, a pause, 1 more. My chest clenched so hard I had to hold the counter. I opened the door to a man who practiced bad news for a living. His hands were gentle. His eyes were tired. His mouth formed words that didn't reach my ears. "There's been an accident at the site," he said. I stared at his throat because looking into his eyes felt like stepping off a roof. I heard the rain louder than his voice. I heard my own breathing, sharp and animal. My fingers found the wire ring and twisted it until the metal bit my skin. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I folded. My knees hit the floor and the tile knocked the breath out of me. He kept talking in the slow, careful way people talk to the injured.
I watched a drip form on the edge of the counter, fatten, fall, shatter into nothing. That was the only thing that made sense, how something whole becomes something else in an instant. I nodded because that was simpler than refusing reality. The baby woke and cried, and my body moved on its own, up and toward the sound, like a magnet dragged across the table. The days that followed were a smear. Papers, signatures.
My son tugged my sleeve. "Where's Daddy?" he asked. His voice was small and even. My throat closed like a fist. I crouched and pulled him against me so he couldn't see my face turn to salt. "It's okay, baby," I whispered into his hair. "Mommy's here." My arms shook. My jaw ached from clenching the sob that wanted to tear me apart. He nodded like I'd answered him. I hadn't. The world didn't break that day. It lowered a little, just enough for my shoulders to remember the weight they used to carry. After everyone left, I stayed by the fresh dirt, fingers numb, lips cracked, heart doing a sad, faithful thud. I placed the folded helmet on the ground and pressed my palm to the cold metal. "I can't do this," I said, and my voice frightened me with how honest it was. The wind answered with nothing. That night, the apartment smelled like bread and rain. I sat on the floor with my back against the door as if grief could knock and I could keep it out. My son slept in my bed, hand flung across the empty space where his father should have been. His tiny breaths counted the seconds. I stared at the ceiling and felt the first real crack in my faith open like a mouth. For years, I thought my mother had broken me. But that night, as I watched the rain fall again, I realized the world could be just as cruel as she was. It was raining again that night. Not a soft kind of rain, the heavy kind that sounds like knocking you can't answer. I remember tucking my son into bed, humming some off-key lullaby, the kind his father used to sing. He smiled, that sleepy half-smile he always gave before drifting off. His hand found mine and held on for a second longer than usual. I kissed his forehead. I don't know why, but I whispered, "Don't grow up too fast, okay?" Then the phone rang. It was late, too late for good news. The voice on the other end was shaking. A man. He said my son's name, then the word accident, and my brain just stopped. I heard car, ambulance, critical condition. The phone slipped. I don't remember putting on my shoes. I just remember running. I stared at the form in my hands. The letters swam. I called my bank. No credit left. I called my husband's old company. No answer. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in years, voices full of sympathy but no solutions. Each time, the line ended with the same sound, a click, the sound of hope being hung up. The clock above the nurse's station ticked lowering every minute. My son's breathing matched it, slower, heavier, a metronome winding down. I called my aunt. She said, "I'm sorry, sweetie. We can't get involved." My cousin didn't pick up. My father didn't answer. Finally, I stared at the one number I swore I'd never dial again, my mother's. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone twice. When she picked up, her voice was the same as always, calm, polite, detached. "Mother," I said, my voice barely working, "please, he's dying. They won't operate without the money." Silence. I thought the call dropped. "Please," I said again, "he's your grandson." When she finally spoke, her words came out smooth and cold. "You made your choices. Live with them." Then, click. I don't know what sound came out of me next. It wasn't a scream, not really. It was something smaller, a sound between a breath and a wound. I stared at the phone in my hand, waiting for it to undo itself, waiting for the world to remember what mercy sounded like. The phone buzzed. For 1 second, I thought she changed her mind. Then I saw the message. One line, one sentence. "Your son isn't worth saving." The words burned through the screen like acid. I read them once, then again, and again, because my mind refused to believe that a mother could write that
that my mother could. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The sound was small, but it split something inside me. I reached for it like I could pull time back, like I could make it unread, but the words were there. They would always be there. My knees gave out. The floor rushed up to meet me. The tile was cold and my palms stung from the impact. I pressed them flat against the ground, trying to stop the spinning. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even cry. The hallway blurred, people running, voices shouting, shoes squeaking on linoleum. I heard a nurse say something about BP dropping. Another voice said, "We're losing him." I pushed myself up and stumbled toward. Then the sound came. That sound. The long, flat note, the one every heart recognizes before the brain does. The monitor went still. The room froze. A nurse reached forward and turned it off. I don't remember falling again, but I did. A pair of hands tried to lift me, but I pushed them away. Someone said, "I'm sorry." Someone else said, "She's in shock." I pressed my forehead against the glass, staring at the place where his chest had risen, now still. His hair was damp, his lips were slightly parted. He looked peaceful, the cruelest kind of peace. "Wake up, baby," I whispered. Nothing moved. The rain outside softened, like the world was running out of ways to hurt me. I wiped my face, but the tears kept coming, relentless, quiet, almost polite. For a moment, I thought I heard him breathe again, just one small sound. But it was only me, choking on air, refusing to accept what the silence had become. People passed behind me, murmuring, shifting, moving on. The world doesn't stop for the dead. It just expects you to follow. I didn't. I stayed there, forehead to glass, heart in pieces, listening to the echo of that flatline replaying inside me. A nurse knelt beside me. She had kind eyes, I remember that. She said something like, "You should rest." I almost laughed. Rest? There's no rest when you've just watched your reason to live fade under fluorescent light. I stood up slowly, one hand on the wall to keep from collapsing again. The hallway swayed, my legs felt foreign. I looked through the window one last time. His blanket was pulled up to his chin. A nurse adjusted it gently, as if comfort still mattered. The rain outside tapped against the glass, steady, patient, indifferent. Each drop sounded like a word I'd never get to say. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "I'm sorry." No one answered. The nurse turned away, the lights dimmed, and the world went still. That's the thing about moments like that. They don't end. They just echo forever. And just like that, she decided who deserved to live. Morning came gray and shallow, like the sky forgot how to wake. The rain had finally quit, but the ground still clutched. Neighbors watched from a distance, as if grief might be contagious. Someone whispered, "She should have called sooner." The words brushed against my skin and disappeared. I let them. My palms were brown with mud and ash, and my nails dug half-moons into my own hands so I could stay in my body. People drifted away the way birds do when they decide a field has nothing left to offer. I stayed, studying the ground like it owed me an answer and was too cowardly to give it. When I finally turned to go, my knees argued. The path bled into puddles, and each step sucked at me like I belonged in the earth with him. The car ride was silent. The driver glanced at me twice and then stopped, like he'd touched a stove. I didn't tell him the address. I just nodded when he guessed right. I didn't pay attention to the city. It moved. I didn't. The door to the apartment stuck the way it always did when it rained. I leaned into it and stepped inside. The bakery's morning sweetness had faded, replaced by damp and dust and a silence that swelled, a lung that refused to exhale. His shoes sat by the door, the tiny ones with the frayed laces he never tied. Toys waited where he'd left them, mid-adventure, stubbornly cheerful. I didn't move them. I couldn't. My body didn't trust me with that much power yet. I set his picture on the table and struck a match. The candle hiccuped and caught. A small flame licked the glass and threw itself into the room. I sat. The chair creaked like it remembered us. I touched the frame with 2 fingers and kept them there until the glass fogged under my breath. "It's not your fault." The sentence broke at the end. There were no tears left. I had emptied myself dry in the hallway of the hospital. There was nothing new to pour. I slid down until my back met the door and the floor gave me its cheap, unforgiving comfort. The phone started its little song, condolences, apologies, pauses that said more than words. I didn't answer. I couldn't stand the weight of sorry. I stared at the window. A car passed. A dog barked. The bakery downstairs shoved its metal shutter up with a clatter, and a voice laughed like the day was just beginning. My candle burned low. The wax days blurred, as if someone had poured water over the calendar and smeared all the numbers. I learned how to live without crying by wearing my body out. I cleaned. I scrubbed the floor until my wrists throbbed. I took apart the drawers and put them back together. I organized the spoons by how they felt in my hand. I washed the bedding twice in one afternoon because the first rinse didn't rinse enough of the past away. The motion helped. It was a chant my bones could say when my brain lost its words. Sometimes the window offered back a face that looked like mine and didn't. Pale, steady, a mouth set for winter. I watched her move around my kitchen and I didn't recognize her, and then I did, and I didn't know which was worse. When the landlord knocked to check on me, I opened the door an inch, kept my foot against the bottom so the draft wouldn't steal what little warmth I had. He asked if everything was okay. I nodded. "I'm fine." The lie slid out clean. It was the first one that didn't hurt. He nodded and left. We both pretended that counted as care. Night stretched long, an elastic band that refused to snap. Sleep didn't want me, so I went looking for the person I used to be. In the back of a closet, under blankets that still smelled like last winter, I found my old diary. The cover was silly, flowers too bright for the way my heart looked now. I opened to a blank page. The pen felt heavy, like it remembered its last confession. My hand shook, but the words steadied it. "When love dies, pride buries it." I stared at the line until the sentence stopped being just ink and started being a rule I could live by. I wasn't healing. I wasn't forgiving. I was accepting a new climate inside me and learning to breathe there. A day came that felt like stone-cold, flat, impossible to move. I opened the closet where the soft colors of his life waited. I took the box from the shelf and set it on the bed. My hands hovered, then settled. I gathered his toys one by one and listened to the little noises they made, a chorus of plastic and fabric and buttons that sang to no one. I folded his shirts, the ones with faded animals, smoothing the sleeves the way I used to smooth his hair. Every movement felt sacred. I lifted the box to the closet shelf. The shelf complained softly and then accepted the weight. I stood there a while, with my palms against the doorframe, as if I could hold the whole apartment up with my own 2 hands. Then I pushed the closet closed. The click sounded like the world pinning a chapter in place. I walked to the front door slowly, as if the floor might change its mind about supporting me. Outside, the city hummed like it always does when it doesn't care what you've lost. Tires hissed over wet streets. Someone laughed hard enough to choke. Somewhere a child yelled about nothing important and everything important. I put my hand on the knob and looked back once at the candle on the table. The flame was small, stubborn, alive. I will never beg again. I said it to the room. I said it to the walls. I said it to the part of me that kept kneeling to things that had no right to be worshipped. The sentence didn't echo. It sank in. I closed the door. The latch caught. The world went silent, the way a heart does when it decides it has nothing else to say. In the days that followed, I learned how to live inside that quiet. I learned how to drink water without tasting guilt. I learned how to stand in the shower and let the heat beat my shoulders until the skin bloomed red and I could pretend it was comfort and not punishment. I learned how to light the candle at dusk and watch the flame write its tiny story against the glass, a story of persistence that didn't need witnesses. I didn't send messages into the void anymore. I didn't check for answers that didn't come. I didn't ask for anything from anyone who would make me crawl to receive it. I folded the last clean towel and slid it into place, corners lined up as if that could keep me from coming undone. The phone vibrated somewhere under a stack of unopened envelopes. I let it. The clock on the wall clicked once each second like a metronome for an empty song. I held the diary again and touched the sentence I'd written. It felt like flint under my fingertips. I buried my son that day. But what really died was the part of me that still believed love could save anything. 3 years is a strange kind of silence. It doesn't heal, it hardens. My apartment learned.
Then the phone rang. I knew the number before I saw it. Some part of the body never forgets. My hand hovered above the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, the way I had 100 times with other ghosts. Instead, I answered. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" His voice shivered through. Older, frayed. "It's me." I didn't say his name. It got stuck between my teeth. He swallowed. "Your mother, she had a stroke." I said nothing. The room listened with me. He tried again, words dragging. "You're the only match." "Please, save her, please." The word moved through me like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I could see the tile floor of a different hospital, feel the ache in my knees, smell the antiseptic that always means fear. I closed my eyes. My breath stuttered, then steadied. I heard the candle hiss softly as it touched a curl of wick. "I'll call you back," I said. I didn't. I hung up and walked to the photo. The edges are soft from years of touch. The glass has a smear where my thumb always lands. "What should I do, baby?" My voice came out steady, not because I was calm, but because the shaking had moved inside where no one could see it. I traced the frozen wax on the saucer. Rain began, polite at first, then certain. It tapped the window like a memory, asking to be let in. I pulled on my coat. My hands trembled once, sharply, like a bird trapped against a window, then quieted. I blew out the candle and watched smoke thread the air. I set the diary in the drawer and closed it. The drive felt longer than it was. The city looked smaller, like a toy you've outgrown, but the memories had learned how to loom. I passed streets where I had once walked fast with my eyes down. I counted lights I used to count for luck. I didn't need luck anymore. I needed distance. It wasn't there. The hospital sign rose with the same sterile glow I remembered. My fingers tightened on the wheel until my knuckles went white. I parked. I sat for a full minute with my hands in my lap, watching the wipers rest. My throat had the taste of pennies. I told myself to open the door. I obeyed. The doors sighed apart and the smell hit me. Bleach, plastic, the hum of machines. My chest pinched hard enough to steal a breath. For a second, the glass threw back the shape of a child beside me, quick as a trick, gone before it hurt too much. I looked down. My hands were empty. At the desk stood my father. His hair had withdrawn from his face, his shoulders sloped. When he turned and saw me, something loosened in him. His lips trembled. He said my name the way a thirsty person says water. "You came," he whispered. I looked past him. Nurses moved with that practiced urgency I used to resent. A volunteer pushed a cart of blankets that would never be warm enough. Somewhere, a monitor chirped and kept someone alive. Everything was too bright, too clean, too loud. "I didn't come to save," I said. My voice surprised me by not breaking. I let the pause spread. "I came to see." He flinched. He nodded, small, like his neck hurt. "Of course," he said, but it sounded like "forgive me." My sister stood near the chairs, arms folded around herself as if she could hold her own regret together. Her eyes met mine and skittered away. Guilt flared, then shame, then the silence we both deserved. She opened her mouth. I lifted a hand.
Don't." The word landed clean. "You had your chance to speak 3 years ago."
Her jaw worked once. She sat down. My father put a hand on the counter, the way old men do when the floor is untrustworthy. He tried again. "She's asking for you." "She's—" A nurse appeared as if summoned. "Are you her daughter?" she asked gently. "Yes. Come with me." We moved down the corridor, and I watched the scuffed line along the wall instead of the rooms. Machines hummed. Rubber soles whispered. The air tasted like old coins and melted ice. I realized my hands were clenched. I forced them open and felt my nails leave my palms. We stopped outside a glass door. The nurse nodded toward the bed. "She's stable." "She keeps asking for you." Her voice had that softness people put on when they are walking you toward something they know you don't want to see. Through the window, I saw a woman I knew and didn't. Smaller, paler. The edges of her had blurred, as if time had sanded her down. Tubes arced from her arm like vines. Tape pulled at her skin. Her hair lay flat, thin and obedient. Her mouth, always a line that could slice, now trembled with the effort of being a mouth. The rise and fall of her chest was a stranger's rhythm. My breath caught. I wasn't ready for weakness on her. I had built her in my mind as iron. Seeing her fragile felt like seeing winter apologize. I didn't go in. I stood in the doorway and let my body remember everything it remembered. The night the phone hung up, the text, the floor against my knees, the sound that turns your blood to glass. My throat tightened, then cleared. The nurse waited a respectful step away. I nodded to her without moving my eyes from the bed. "Thank you." Left alone, I stayed in the threshold like it could protect me. The monitors blinked their indifferent language. The air in the room moved in a careful circle, cooling a person who had never cooled for me. My reflection hovered in the glass, older, colder. I didn't recognize my eyes until I did. My father came up behind me, but didn't cross the invisible line. "She wants to speak to you," he said softly. "She asked about—" He stopped. He looked at my hands the way a man looks at a blade. "I'm not ready," I said. He swallowed. "We don't know how much time." I turned a fraction. "I do." He flinched again. We stood like that, two people holding different ends of the same rope. He spoke carefully, as if volume could change meaning. "I'm sorry," he said. "Are you?" The words came out plain, not cruel, tired. "Where were you when I needed you?" His mouth opened, closed. "I was there," he tried. "You were quiet," I said. "That's not the same as being there." The silence after that was heavy but honest. He nodded. He looked older than the hallway. I believed him in a way that didn't help either of us. The nurse returned with a clipboard. "If you decide to proceed with testing," she said, "we can move quickly." I let the sentence sit. Testing. Match. Save words with weight I didn't pick up. I stepped closer to the glass. My mother's eyelids fluttered. Her hand twitched on the sheet, searching for something that wasn't there. I pressed 2 fingers to the doorframe and felt the tremor in my own body. "Do you even know what it feels like to beg?" I asked the room. It came out a whisper. It went nowhere. The door didn't care. The machines didn't answer. My reflection met my eyes, steady, cold. I straightened my back without meaning to. Old posture, new spine. The air felt thin. I drew a slow, quiet breath and held it until the shaking in my hand settled into a manageable tremor. I looked once more, long enough to memorize the shape of her vulnerability, to honor it without letting it seduce me. Then I stepped back from the glass. "I need air," I said to no one and everyone. I walked away before anyone could see my hands betray me. The last time I stood in a hospital, I begged her to save my child. This time she was the one waiting for mercy, and I wasn't sure I had any left to give. The light in ICU doesn't feel like light. It feels like judgment. It hums without warmth, and the air tastes like coins. I stand in the doorway and let the machines count the seconds I've already lived through once. Beep, beep, beep. I don't step in. My shoes hold the line. She lies there, small, pale,
chin trembling with the effort of finding breath. The woman who measured everyone's worth with a glance now looks like she's afraid to open her eyes. My father sits in the corner with his fingers knotted, lips pressed to a prayer he can't finish. My sister clutches a tissue that's still dry. Their silence is heavy enough to bruise. Her lips move. It takes a second for the sound to arrive. "Daughter, please." The word lands between us like a dropped glass. My throat tightens. I don't go closer. I reach into my pocket instead and pull out the only truth anyone in this room has ever given me straight. I hold the screen so she can read it. The letters are old, but they haven't faded. Your son isn't worth saving. I hear my own voice come out quiet, almost kind, funeral soft. Do you remember these words? The monitor fills the silence like a witness. Beep, beep. No one answers. She blinks once, slow and guilty. Her mouth opens. Nothing comes out. 3 years ago, I say, I begged you like this. I can hear the hospital floor cracking under my knees again. I can see the text bubble that never turned blue. You heard me cry. You heard him dying, and you let him. My sister chokes on a sob. My father covers his face with both hands as if shame is bright. You told me to live with my choices. The words walk out of me one by one. I let each one stand. Now you get to live with yours. No one breathes. My father lurches to his feet, desperate. She's sorry, he says. His voice is raw. She knows she was wrong. Please, don't let hate. Hate would mean I still care. My voice doesn't raise. It doesn't need to. I turn my head just enough to look at him. He flinches like I slapped him. I look back at... I take another step. The bed rails hum faintly, as if warning me away. She lifts her hand toward me, trembling fingers, palm open, a gesture I once would have run to. My eyes stay on hers. My gaze doesn't soften. It can't. 3 years ago, you chose who lived, I say. Now it's my turn. My father tries to be a bridge and becomes a wound. Please, he says, voice breaking. She's still your mother. And he was still her grandson. I don't look at him when I say it. I watch the understanding push sweat across his forehead. A doctor slips in with the quiet skill of someone who practices bad news, clipboard held like a shield. We need your consent for the procedure, he says, gentle because he knows what words can weigh. Without it, she won't make it. All eyes find me, the way eyes always find the person who's about to break the room. Time loosens. Beep, beep. Rain begins somewhere I can't see and taps against a window like it has a right to be here. The paper is the same bleached color as every form I signed with shaking hands while people said there was still time. My fingers remember the drag of a pen through a blur of tears. My palm remembers the way ink can feel like blood. He holds out the form. I take the pen. It's heavier than it should be. I let it rest between my fingers. My hand doesn't move. I set it down on the clipboard with care, the way you put down something that could explode. No. The doctor stills. Ma'am, I can't sign it, I say. I hear my voice and barely recognize it, calm as clean bone. Some people just aren't worth saving. There's no anger in it. Anger would be mercy. Anger says you still expect the world to be fair. What lives in me now has no expectations. It's just the truth, and it's cold. She gasps. One sharp, tearing breath, and then another. The monitor stutters. My sister finally uses the tissue, a sound like fabric ripping. My father stumbles toward the bed, shouting for help, with a voice that knows how to beg now. I don't move. The doctor squeezes past me, snapping orders that sound like verbs thrown into a storm. Nurses flood the space in a choreography I already learned by heart in a different... The team keeps trying until the air itself gives up. The doctor's eyes dim by degrees you can measure if you've ever watched hope die professionally. One by one, the bodies pull back, soft curses muffled by masks, shoulders lowered under the weight of another number. They withdraw. They leave behind a bed that looks like a stage after the actors go home. My father folds into the chair like someone took out all the bones. My sister's sobs echo into the corridor and make other doors close. No one looks at me. No one says my name. That feels accurate. I walk to the window and rest my fingertips against the cool glass. The rain streaks it in tired lines. Each drop is a tiny decision falling in a world that won't catch it. My breath makes a halo on the pain. It fades. It returns. It fades again. I let the quiet come. I let it sit in my lungs. I let it shape my mouth into something that can finally hold a single sentence without breaking. And just like that, I whisper, she decided who deserved to live. The monitor is silent now, but the word deserve keeps ringing. It rings in the steel of my spine and the ache in my jaw and the old ache in my knees. It rings in the 2 inches of air between my hand and the glass, in the distance I learned to keep in order to stay alive. It rings until the room feels empty enough to forgive me for breathing. I don't turn around. I don't explain myself to the people who taught me how to survive by withholding. I stand there and let the rain count time for me. I count with it. I think of all the times I used the word please and how it always sounded like surrender in my mouth. I taste the new word now, no, and how it tastes like iron and steadiness and the edge of a cliff I've already jumped from and somehow lived. Behind me, fabric rustles. A chair scrapes. A small prayer unravels. I don't catch any of it. The only thing I hold is the stillness that follows a storm and the knowledge that I can live inside it. My hand drops from the window. I look at my palm. The half-moons my nails left there have stopped reddening. They fade as I watch. I step back to the doorway that brought me here. I stand on.
The sky wore the same gray I carried in my chest. No thunder, no apology, just a lid over the day. I stood a few steps from the grave and tried to feel anything that wasn't complicated. I couldn't. Her name looked softer carved in stone than it ever sounded in my mouth. People hovered in the safe distance where judgment feels brave. Words floated across the grass like gnats. She let her mother die. Didn't even try. Like mother, like daughter. I kept my eyes on the dirt, on the uneven mound that made the ground look like it was holding its breath. My hands were cold even in my pockets. I didn't answer anyone. I couldn't teach them a history they never had to live. Silence did the work for me. When the last polite hug wandered away, I stayed. The flowers looked tired already, their bright faces wilting as if grief were weather. My knees wanted to fold, but I wouldn't give the earth that. I stared at the soil the way I used to stare at locked doors. "You finally got your peace, didn't you?" I said. No anger, just a flat line, the kind of tired sleep can't fix. I walked home under low clouds that felt like the ceiling coming down. The street had that wet shine that promises rain without delivering it yet. I counted steps because numbers are easier than feelings. At the building door, a man waited with his hands tucked around an envelope like it might try to escape. He cleared his throat. "She told me to give this to you." My fingers went numb. "Who?" "Your mother," he said, before she passed. He didn't stay for questions. He pressed the envelope into my palm and nodded like he'd just put down a weight. His shoes faded down the sidewalk. I held the paper the way you hold a hot pan, surprised you haven't dropped it and unsure where to set it down. Inside, my apartment felt too clean. The candle by my son's picture burned with that stubborn little flame that always looks like it's about to surrender and never does. I sat at the table and let the envelope sit there like a live thing. My name stared up at me in her handwriting, sharp loops, a confident tilt, now shaky around the edges. It looked fragile. I wasn't used to her handwriting being anything but strict. I broke the seal. The paper the words wobbled on the page like they were standing on a boat. I didn't cry. Not at first. I laughed once.
a dry little sound that made the room feel too big. "Now you say it," I whispered. "Now." I read it again, slower, tripping over every "I wanted" like a piece of furniture left in the dark. My jaw clenched so hard my temples pulsed. The letter trembled in my hands, and I told myself it was the paper, not me. The window darkened, and finally the rain began, soft as a secret at first, then honest. I stood with the letter still open and went to the glass. The sound filled the room the way music does when you've forgotten it exists. I pressed the page against the cool pane and watched the ink grow damp at the edges. Her words bled into each other in places, confession turning watercolor. I could hear her voice as she would have read it, clipped, controlled, with that thin ribbon of apology she never fed enough to keep alive. The sentences landed like flat stones, no flourish, just weight. I was wrong. My throat buckled. People say those words like they cost nothing. She had written them like they cost blood. I chose pride over love. I closed my eyes and saw that night again, the phone, the tile, the steady murder of a machine doing its terrible job. The sentence hit a place I had plastered over and painted white. The paint cracked all the way down. I heard him crying. My hand flattened against the glass. I wanted the window to crack under my palm. I wanted anything to crack that wasn't me. The room pressed in and held me like a terrible hug. I couldn't bear to see you prove me wrong. That one slid under my ribs. I had forgiven many smaller things without knowing I was doing it. I had forgiven sloppy birthdays and cold compliments, and the way she praised my posture like it was a moral achievement. I had never forgiven this, the way her love had always needed to win. You were everything I wasn't brave enough to be. My face got hot. It felt like standing too close to a fire that isn't yours. I hope God lets me beg you again, in another life. I read that line out loud. The word beg dragged out of me like a rope I didn't want to pull. I thought of my own voice in a different corridor, the way please sounded. I pressed the letter to my chest like it could measure my heartbeat and tell me if I was still human. My shoulders started to shake. I tried to hold them still out of habit. The habit broke. One tear slid down. Not a flood. Just the body letting go of a single drop it had guarded like a jewel. In that one tear, my lungs widened. Air returned the way a stray cat returns, suspicious, cautious, not promising to stay. I inhaled and didn't feel guilty about it. I exhaled and didn't feel empty. I set the letter gently on the table. The candle by my son's photo wobbled in a draft, then corrected itself. I watched the flame fight nothing and still need to prove it could stand. I understood that a little too well. I ran my finger over the lines. Half the ink held, half blurred. That felt right. The past doesn't stay crisp. It stains and smears and refuses to be either erased or preserved, half saved, half lost, like us. I didn't fold the letter back up. I left it open, between the candle and the window, between light and weather. That felt like the truest place for it to live. The room exhaled. Maybe that was me. For years, I had built my mother into a statue just so I could hate the stone. This paper complicated the shape. It didn't turn her into a saint. It didn't turn me into a monster. It just did the smallest, hardest thing. It made her human. I looked at my son's photo. I wanted to tell him something wise, something clean. All I had was the mess. I brushed the edge of his frame with my knuckle. "We're okay," I said. It wasn't a promise. It was a hope dressed as a fact. Rain braided itself into the night. The city flattened into a hush that didn't feel empty. I could hear someone upstairs moving furniture. I could smell bread from downstairs, even though the ovens had been cold for hours. Life, rude as ever, kept leaning in. I returned to the window and watched the drops chase each other down the glass like tiny races no one would win. For years I thought hatred anchored me. Maybe it just kept me from floating into something softer I didn't trust. For years I thought she hated me, I said to the glass.
The morning was too quiet to belong to the same world I'd lived in. No sirens, no whispers, no footsteps in the hallway. Just the sound of the ocean waiting somewhere beyond the fog. I carried 2 things in my bag, a small urn that fit in the palm of my hand and an envelope, worn and wrinkled from all the times I had opened it and refused to forgive it. The sand was still cold when I stepped onto it. Each grain stuck to my shoes like it didn't want me to go. I thought about turning back, but there was nothing left to turn back to. My mother was gone, my son was gone. Only their echoes remained, waiting to see what I'd do with them. I walked until the sand grew soft, where it started to give under my feet. The tide stretched out like a promise I wasn't sure I could trust. The sky wasn't blue yet. It was the color between endings and beginnings. I sat down, the urn in my lap. The waves came close enough to touch my toes, then pulled away like they were afraid of what I carried. I whispered, "It's just us again, baby." My voice sounded steadier than I expected. "You can rest now." I unscrewed the lid. For a moment, my hands didn't move. Ashes look nothing like people. They're too light, too quiet. I lifted the urn and let the wind catch it. The ashes didn't scatter fast. They hovered, spinning, like they didn't want to leave me yet. Then the wind carried them away, out to the horizon, where sky and water met and became one endless thing. The sea took him gently, just the way I prayed it would. Then I took out the letter. It was still stained where rain had bled through the words. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every line now, every broken sentence that sounded like regret trying to make itself human. I pressed it to my chest once. "You finally understand, don't you?" I said softly. "Love isn't about control. It's about surrender." I tore it slowly, letting each piece drift down to the water. They floated for a second, then disappeared, sinking like tiny white birds too tired to fly. The ocean swallowed them both, the ashes and the apology. My son's innocence, my mother's pride. The 2 people who built me, ruined me, and somehow led me here to this quiet morning where grief finally loosened its grip. I whispered, "You both..." The message was simple. No one is worth losing to pride. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My thumb hovered over the screen. The number didn't matter. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was chance. Maybe it was her in some way I'd never understand. I smiled, the kind of smile that trembles on its way out. "Yeah," I whispered. "You're right." The wind carried my words across the water. I hoped they reached wherever they were meant to go. I stood up, brushing the sand from my palms. The waves erased my footprints one by one. Soft, patient, relentless. I didn't mind. Some things are meant to disappear. "Forgiveness isn't about who deserves it," I said quietly, watching the water fold into itself again and again. "It's about who deserves peace." And for the first time in years, I said it like I believed it. The sun climbed higher, breaking through what was left of the gray. The sea glittered like a heartbeat made of light. I felt small, but not powerless. Empty, but not hollow. This was what freedom felt like. Not joy, not triumph, just the quiet certainty that the story was finally done. I turned away from the waves, the wind at my back, and began to walk. Each step felt lighter, each breath felt new. Behind me, the ocean kept whispering its endless lullaby, the sound of everything I lost and everything I finally let go. Maybe I'll never stop missing them. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe love isn't supposed to end. It just changes shape until it stops hurting. I glanced at the sky one last time and whispered, "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, baby." Then, softer, "Thank you." Because without them, their cruelty, their kindness, their silence, I would never have learned what love really costs and what it's worth. If someone once broke you, and now they're the one asking for forgiveness, what would you do? Would you let them back in? Or would you stay silent the way they once did? Tell me your truth in the comments, because someone out there needs to hear your story tonight. If this story touched you, like, share, and follow for more real stories that make us feel.